Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about healthy relationships don't do that, a guide for gay men's dating, and more. And, as a gay men's specialist therapist for over 29 years in 2021, I've always enjoyed being active on social media and interacting with my therapist colleagues there. Facebook, Instagram, most therapists have some kind of a presence in social media. And it's a way for personal expression for us as people and as professionals. And it's also a way of sharing with our audience and kind of promoting a mental health awareness, promoting an awareness of our services, maybe even a nod to social justice on certain issues. And recently, I saw a great post from my local Los Angeles colleague on Instagram, Armine Asatryan. I'm not sure I exactly pronounced that name. It's an Armenian name. So Armina is Armine, and Asatryan is Asatryan. And she's an LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist, who is a specialist in anxiety and cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy is a lot of what I do in my practice. And she has the handle Therapy with Armina, all one word, on Instagram. And she's located in Santa Clarita, California. If you're interested in learning more about her, it's Armine Asatryan in Santa Clarita at 844-606-0679. 844-606-0679. And her post that I was responding to kind of coincided with an episode idea that I've been wanting to do for a while. So seeing Armina's post is really kind of inspiration for me to get down to it. And it was about, Armina's post gave a list of items that in her careful observation and experience as a clinician are associated with unhealthy relationships. These traits. I've noticed some too. I think we all do for therapists and relationship coaches who work with couples. So there's a list of 14. Let's go through them. Okay, number one is, it's all in verbs. Number one is insult. Number two is blame. Number three is compete. Number four is distrust. Number five is resent. Number six is deny. Number seven is threat. Number 8 is disrespect. Number 9 is hold grudges. Number 10 is criticize. Number 11, keep secrets. Number 12, demand. Number 13, ridicule. And number 14, abuse. Now we'll come back to those and we'll dive down into that list a little further. Now in another screenshot of that post from Armina, just to be balanced, she also listed the traits that are associated with what she would call healthy relationships. And I would agree with most of these, but let's look at her list for now. Also 14, just to be balanced. Now these were respect, encourage, trust, support, compliment, safe, boundaries, communicate, validate, appreciate, compromise, forgive, value, and of course, love. So in previous blog articles on gaytherapyla.com/blog, which I always encourage you to visit, and in previous podcast episodes here, I've discussed the building blocks of a healthy relationship as applied to gay men as a combination of commitment, communication, and compromise. Now, there are other structures. I borrow sometimes from Dr. Walter Brackelman's, who gives the 3 T's of time, talking and listening, and touch. So very similar kinds of structures. So I've also discussed making your relationship work on the 4 levels. The emotional, what is the emotional life between you and your partner? Or really, when you think about it, this could apply to a dating situation too, even early dating. Is the emotional. How do you feel? Number 2 is the physical, affection, sexuality. Number 3 is the domestic. You might not have a domestic component to early dating, but you certainly would in more serious relationships, even if it's long distance, there still might be a domestic component about how each of you manages a separate home. And number 4 is the one I call managing the other. And that's coping with stressors that impede on a gay relationship from the outside in. I have previous episodes, if you look on the episode list, on commitment, communication, and compromise, and then also on the 4 levels, the emotional, the physical, the domestic, and managing the other, in previous episodes, if you want to dig those up in the podcast. And I've also discussed, some of the risks of breakup, of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And there's another podcast episode on that, about the 4 risks of breakup, according to the couples therapy research of John and Julie Gottman. And there's always a little bit of a leap here, because whenever we see material on couples, we always have to do that extra translation of saying, okay, let's put this in a gay male context, because this is a gay men's podcast. I mean, with all due respect to the entire community, the population at large, and the LGBT population in general, I always say out of LGBT, I focus on the G. But there would be other special considerations in trans relationships, in lesbian relationships, among bisexuals especially. But for these purposes here, I focus on gay men and the context of this dual masculine identity. Because when you have particularly two cisgender, but it could be trans men also, but when you have 2 masculine energies and identities in a relationship, it's a little different from any other permutation. So I'd actually like to revisit Armine's list of healthy relationship traits another time, and I want to address the unhealthy traits here. Don't always like to focus on the negative instead of the positive, but I think the positive traits kind of speak for themselves. The negative traits need more examination and troubleshooting so that you don't accidentally fall into them. So, over many years of practice, specifically with gay male couples, it's 29 years now in 2021, I've thought about these traits often, the things that feed and nurture a relationship, and then there are factors that detract from it and can be corrosive and even destroy them. Relationships do end. I've noticed that a couple that I worked with recently has decided to break up, and even couples therapy can't save every relationship, because there may be dynamics involved, but couples therapy and relationship coaching can certainly help, and it's certainly worth a try. It's just that, relationships can be fragile, and you have to kind of take care of them. That's why I think paying attention to the negative traits is something that's worth doing. So I think sometimes the guys that I work with, either in couples or as individuals, have so few gay male friends that they aren't discussing important, intimate topics in relationships with friends, and they lose the perspective that there are just certain things that aren't done if you expect your relationship to endure or to be happy, or both. Sometimes I just want to say to a client I'm working with about his relationship or what's going on in his dating dynamics, hey, dude, healthy relationships don't do that. I just have that perspective. And I know that's judgy and that's labeling and all that stuff. But, as I always say, the older I get, the stronger my opinions get, because in 29 years working with gay couples, I really see eventually common denominators of what tends to work in the long term and what tends to be very detrimental in the long term. And they're shockingly consistent. So let's look at Armine's list of the unhealthy traits. And with each one of these, stay with me, there's going to be 14. We'll look at the trait and we'll discuss it a little bit, and then I'm going to offer you a solution to it. I don't like to raise problems without offering you a little bit of a solution, because that would be just kind of depressing. So for each one of these, if one of these negative traits applies to you or what your partner's doing to you, I'll offer you a solution to at least think about. Although remember that a podcast cannot be a substitute for relationship coaching or couples therapy or formal service. This is for education and even entertainment purposes only. So, number one, insulting your partner. So, sometimes in gay relationships there can be an aspect of, oh, it's just us boys here, and boys talk in a certain way, even if we're grown men. And this means that without realizing it fully, we can get into disrespecting our partner or spouse. When we get angry, especially if alcohol or other substances are involved, we can get a little too familiar with language and go into insulting our partners with name-calling or cussing or very aggressive phrases like shut up or even fuck you. And this is not healthy. Healthy relationships don't do that. We have to be able to be in a relationship, and while we're not feeling like we're speaking at the ladies' auxiliary in 1940, but to still remember our manners and just have a boundary that there are certain words and phrases that we don't say to someone if we expect our partners to remain, our partners. So, what's the solution? Instead of insulting your partner with some kind of crass name-calling or statement used in the heat of the moment of anger, use the classic exercise of I statements. I feel very angry right now because of what happened earlier at the bar tonight. You have a right to express your feelings so that you communicate times when you feel hurt or insulted or abandoned or disrespected, but you don't really have the right to verbally abuse your partner for some kind of perceived slight. That would be this very negative narcissistic injury. And you can discuss your complaint without getting anywhere near that kind of below-the-belt, crass insult area. Number 2 is blame. Instead of telling your partner, you messed up and here's why, take responsibility and own your part of the conflict, while also being assertive enough to ask your partner to take responsibility and own what you feel is their part of it. Perhaps the best kinds of conflict resolution processes are when each side of the conflict owns its own part of the conflict while also explaining their complaint to the other person. We take a balanced approach. No one is all good or all bad here. It's just differences in values, differences in feelings and influences and opinions, and especially values. So what's the solution? Don't blame as much as you just explain your feelings, such as, I felt ignored when you didn't introduce me to your former co-workers that we ran into last night at the bar. I own that I should not have stormed off and gone home, but I'd like to ask you to please not ignore me like that when we run into people whom you know, but I don't, in public places. Please introduce me and make me a part of the conversation. I've had couples give that example more than once about how their partner treats them in the context of being in a public place, like a bar or a club or an event or something like that. Number 3 is compete. For many years I've said that one of the things that characterizes same-sex, especially male relationships, is that even though as two men we are not rival suitors competing for the affections of a woman, like two straight guys would be, or like, gorillas in the animal kingdom, gay men will still have a part of their minds, really their brains, that knows we are in the presence of another male and we compete. The work of Justin Lehmiller, Lehmiller, who wrote the great book on sexual fantasies called Tell Me What You Want, said in a seminar the most fascinating research that he quoted, that when another man is in the presence of another man in the room when he's having sex, supposedly with a woman, he will come harder or he will ejaculate harder and his sperm count will go up just because he's in the presence of another male. And I was like, what the hell is that? Because that's like that very animal kingdom stuff about, how does my sperm count know that there's another man in the room? But, apparently very reliable research has indicated that. And it's very humbling. And it's like, oh, wow. So, men really do compete in this primal species survival of the fittest way in the presence of another man. So even though we might be in the presence of another man who's our partner that we're in love with because we're gay, there still can be an element of competition there because it's the two male species in the room. And, humans are still animals. We like to think we're not, but we're still part of the grand animal kingdom. So if our partner comes home and announces that he got a raise at work today, we're tempted to go into work the very next day and ask for a raise. If our partner announces, hey, I've lost 15 pounds running and got hit on by the cute checkout guy at the grocery store, isn't there always one? We immediately start looking for our old running shoes and throw out the Hostess Ding Dong, mid-bite. We just tend to do that. Now, what's the solution? When we are with our partner, we want to support their success without feeling like we have to immediately respond and match what they do. We might be inspired by their dedication and hard work and effort, but it should be just that, inspiration, and not like some kind of a contest where we see our partner as an adversary that we have to vanquish so that we always maintain the upper hand. We want to go for a mutual collaboration and not one-upsmanship. Leave that for other types of relationships, like at work or in sports or something. Number 4 is distrust. I see this one a lot in my practice. Many guys contact me and they want couples therapy or relationship coaching in order to rebuild trust that was somehow lost. And distrust, also known as mistrust, can take many forms, such as asking your partner challenging questions for them to account for their whereabouts, or going through their phone to check just who they've been texting or sexting. I have a blog article on gaytherapyrelay.com/blog. 2 of those, really. One is resist the urge to snoop, and the other one is relax, it's just text. And it's about the role of gay men's texting or sexting in modern life, and it's not nearly as threatening as you might think. So the gay apps have become too pervasive these days for anyone, including our partners or ourselves, not to get drawn into some form of online communication or even online flirtation. It's the same thing with money issues. Some partners insist on having access to and overseeing their partner's individual bank accounts or Venmo account to see how they are spending and when and with whom, scouting for anything they disapprove of. These intrusive types of actions don't speak to trust in a relationship. They are indicative of wanting to control or manipulate or even subjugate our partner, which are never positive traits in a relationship. And this is separate from discussing whether or not to have a monogamy agreement or what the ground rules of consensual non-monogamy are in an open relationship. That's a different topic altogether when it comes to how the agreements are arrived at and sustained and mutually adhered to. So what's the solution? We have to learn to tolerate the anxiety that we don't always know our partner's whereabouts or activities or motivations. Maybe they don't want time alone away from you to cheat or have sex outside your monogamy agreement or break your consensual non-monogamy rules, but maybe they want to just visit a store alone to buy a birthday or a holiday gift for you. Maybe they don't want to have an affair or leave you, but they do want to have some privacy of their own, because being in a relationship means that you don't give up all of your individuality. This can include separate hobbies, certainly going to work, some friendships, and certainly each guy's own relationship to porn and masturbation activities. And these exist even in healthy relationships. That's one of the things, I don't work that much with straight couples, even though I'm a certified sex therapist. I could, but I usually work with gay men. But I hear about this in straight couples all the time, about how straight women get all up in arms about their husband or their boyfriend's porn use, and they get this abandonment rage or this abandonment anxiety, not understanding that masturbation and the use of porn, particularly for men who are more visually sexually stimulated, is common. that it's a normal thing, but there's a way to use porn in healthy ways. And there's no such thing as porn addiction that's kind of made up and moralistic, and it's when the religious right and the Puritan ethics finds its way into clinical language. But David Lay's book, Ley, is a great one. It's called Ethical Porn for Dicks, meaning ethical porn use for people who have penises, for men. And that it really explains why porn is not an addiction and why it's something that definitely can be healthy and ethical. Not all porn is unethical, despite what the very far right would say in a religious moralistic way and what the very far left would say in like an extreme misandrous, radical feminism. Not all women are exploited in porn, even though some can be. But, porn is a very fraught topic, and it's one that needs discussion for it to be ethical. And Dr. Lay's book is a good start on that. Because ethical behavior really breeds trust. And in the podcast episode about the 6 principles of sexual health as applied to gay men, shared values was one of those traits that are important in as a component of sexual health. Number 5 is when you resent a partner. So that's similar to compete. We have to develop the healthy communication skills to never agree to any set of rules in your relationship that your heart, among other organs, isn't really into. Don't agree to be monogamous prematurely or even at all, or to refrain from sexting others, like I said earlier, or if you really don't want to. It's better to bite the bullet and sit your partner down to discuss issues that bother you openly, rather than, to keep quiet in that passive, unassertive, self-abandoning way and then hold resentments later. So what's the solution for resentment? Ask yourself if you feel any resentments currently toward a partner. What do you resent them for? If you do, there's an agenda for a discussion with them sometime soon, or for your next therapy session or relationship coaching. Clear the air. Sit them down and clear the air. You have a right to air your grievance, even if your partner might need to outline their defense or explain the situation further or ask for you to compromise in some way, to have some kind of a response. But you have the right to bring it up for discussion. And then, find solutions through creative, constructive compromises that you both can live with without lingering hurt or resentments. Compromise is getting a little, and it's also not getting a little. You live with the satisfaction that you're getting something, and you also live with the frustration that you're not getting everything. And that's how people come from 2 different places and meet in the middle in order to move on. Number 6 is to deny. If your partner levels with you and calls you out on something they know you did that upset them, don't deny it unless what they are really saying is truly untrue. Denial is a primitive psychological defense, as they say. If they confront you, especially with evidence, then discuss it. Tell them your own rationale for doing what you did, even if they think that reasoning is illegitimate or problematic in some way. What is the solution to denial? If something your partner confronts you about is true, even if just, and I use that word cautiously, their feelings, cop to it. Be an open book. If they remain angry, ask to make an explanation or to put your behavior in some kind of rationale or context. Work towards solutions based on facts, not on distortions or denials. Your relationship will be better from this point forward if you deal with direct honesty and the reality of the feelings and thoughts and opinions and values that both of you have. You really begin the process of healing, and you begin the process of conflict resolution when both of you put your true feelings out on the table, and thoughts too, even if what you're saying is maybe going to not be a popular thing for your partner to hear. But it is the first step in conflict resolution. Number 7 is threats. Threats are primitive, low-level, crass communications. In some cases they are illegal. Other times they're just aggressive and manipulative and mean-spirited or cruel. Don't threaten as a defense against what they are saying or doing with you. Threats come from an emotionally desperate place, as a defense against your losing control or becoming overwhelmed emotionally and convinced that you can't handle this without desperate extreme actions. Well, yes, you can. Get a grip on yourself. Learn to use affect regulation. Take a deep breath, take a step back, and work on regulation skills like deep breathing or even a short silence to really collect your thoughts on how to respond, not just impulsively react to what is happening. What's the solution or the alternative to threats? Express your feelings instead. Instead of saying, if you don't quit your excessive drinking, I'm out of here. Although there can be a place for that in some situations when you're dealing with somebody with an alcohol or drug problem. But instead say, I feel your use of alcohol has gotten out of hand, and I need you to understand how that harms me and others around us, and for us to discuss options for solutions. You're really owning it, but you're also confronting an idea that you've developed a resentment about because of their behavior. Number 8 is disrespect. That's a sign of an unhealthy relationship. I'm an old movie buff, and I remember watching a clip of Lee Minnelli, the widow of bisexual director Vincent Minnelli, former husband of Judy Garland and Liza's father, talking about Vincent's movies like Meet Me in St. Louis. And she called him in interviews Mr. Minnelli in the interview. Betty Davis called Joan Crawford Miss Crawford on the set of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane before Crawford was replaced by Olivia de Havilland. Calling people, even spouses or close co-workers, by their last names back then, in days gone by, was a sign of respect. And while I don't recommend that you call your partner by his last name, I can see a case being made for the idea that modern interpersonal relationships of many kinds suffer these days from a lack of basic respect. Think of ways you might disrespect your partner. Do you fail to be honest with him? Do you fail to apply tact and diplomacy and discretion and compassion in the way that you talk to him? Do you overrule his rights to things like patience and privacy? Do you create any awkward situations with members of his family of origin? If you really reflect, you might find some examples where you're not always respecting the supposedly most important person to you in the world. And if you can't think of any, ask him. I bet he gives you some examples. So what's the solution to disrespect? Remember that no matter how long you've been together, you want to provide and ask for an atmosphere of basic respect and dignity exists in your home for everyone, including each other. Find gentler ways of stating confrontations, complaints, or requests. This helps avoid the erosion of love and warm, fuzzy feelings that can happen in your house over time, where bitterness and contempt can be cultivated. It preserves a loving atmosphere of dignity and safety and comfort for the long term that just starts with a basic respect. Number 9, unhealthy relationships, they hold grudges. This is an easy one. Just don't do it. If you feel a topic has not been talked through, and you're holding resentments, like we talked about earlier, then you need to sit your partner down and revisit the topic until you're satisfied that you can clear the air and ultimately let it go, Miss Elsa Ice Princess. Reflect on it if you hold grudges against your partner, which you're probably not nearly as good at hiding as you think you are. If you reflect on these things and you find that you are holding grudges, sit your partner down and bring them up and ask for what you need. Are you asking for a compromise? Are you asking for him to apologize about something? Are you asking him for an explanation of something you don't fully understand? Are you asking him to give him an absolution? Something. Think about just what would it take for you to let that grudge against him go. So you identify your grudges. You identify the solutions that you want to ask or request of your partner. You negotiate some kind of terms for a compromise agreement, and then you wipe the slate clean. You just can't move on with a good present and a good future if you're holding grudges in your back pocket somewhere. Grudges are corrosive and they're antithetical to love, so let them go and have the talks that you need to have in order to be able to let them go. I can let this go if, and fill in the blank. Number 10 is criticize. Now that was one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse of breakups, identified by couples researchers John and Julie Gottman. And instead of identifying what your partner is doing and just letting them have it for all the ways that he's doing it wrong, speak in those I statements about your needs instead. So the solution is, don't say, you're such a lazy bum. I have to do all the work in this house. Say, I've been feeling especially tired lately because I feel like our household chores are not evenly divided between the two of us. Can we discuss some ways that we could balance these out? So you're still saying almost the same thing as, you're such a lazy bum. But, which one would you rather hear? So instead of criticizing, just describe how you're tired or frustrated or you feel something is out of whack or unjust. And then say, can we talk about ways that we might change that so that I don't feel that way? Number 11, keeping secrets. And while I am the first one to advocate for a certain amount of privacy in relationships, particularly among two men, who were raised with male privilege to get their way in society and not be told what to do by others, I think it's also true about the old AA saying, Alcoholics Anonymous, you're only as sick as your secrets. Learn the difference between a healthy privacy, like keeping the contents of your journal or your individual therapy sessions private from others, including your partner, and something less benign. Secrets that are inherently dysfunctional and potentially corrosive, such as having a secret relationship to alcohol or other substances, keeping secret certain habits like gambling away money or even hoarding money in a separate secret bank account or some kind of impulsive spending or some kind of communicating that you're doing with an ex or with another guy that violates a monogamy agreement or violates the ground rules of even a consensual non-monogamous relationship. Think about what you're hiding and then why. It's usually very shame-based for some reason. So what's the solution? Keeping secrets, or let's face it, just plain lying, is a psychological defense against the emotional, intolerable state of feeling embarrassed or ashamed or unsafe. So trust that your partner can handle it. He's a big boy, even if the news they're not going to be thrilled about. He can handle it. If you have differences on a topic, you identify and express your respective feelings. Each one takes a turn. And then you work toward resolving any conflict by forging a creative and practical compromise that can work for both of you. And learn to know the difference. What is privacy and what is keeping secrets from your partner out of a sense of shame? The things that you're doing that he's not aware of should be passed through that test and then see what you come up with. Number 12 is making demands. So as we said earlier, men, particularly white men, in our society are not used to being told no. They're not used to anyone making demands on them in a way that would interrupt their assumption of male privilege. Which is, it's that male privilege is there for guys even though we don't realize it. If you don't realize exactly how we have automatic male privilege, I always say, ask a lesbian, or ask a woman, what is male privilege to you from your woman's point of view? And they'll tell you. It's like, well, you do have to do certain things and you don't have to do other things when you have certain privileges. So demands that you make of your partner create this kind of hierarchical up-down boss-employee or master-slave dynamic, and not in the good kinky way, but in that kind of, oppressive way. So what's the solution to demands? Reframe any demands that you make of your partner as requests and lay out your rationale for making the request. Advocate for what you want via compromise and persuasion and the occasional arguing your case of why you want something or don't want to do something, instead of trying to get what you want by being a tyrant or winning a power struggle with coercion. Your partner is not your employee, it's not your child, it's not your dog. You don't have any kind of hierarchical. You might be the boss at work, you might be the boss of 100 people at work. But once you get through the front door, you're not the boss of your partner. You're in an equal collaboration with him. And that's an important thing to think about as you pass through your front door every night. Seduce your partner into seeing it your way with any topic, and realize that the agreements that you forge together breed the least resentment, and they're the most enduring because you came up with it yourself. Where do we want to go on vacation this year? How do we want to decorate our home? How do we want to handle some kind of a decision? When you do it collaboratively and conjointly, you end up with decisions that sit better after you've made them. So number 13 is ridicule. So similar to the word contempt, which John and Julie Gottman talked about, another horseman of the apocalypse that you want to avoid is anything that's a caustic or mean-spirited or sarcastic or superior humiliation of a partner. Just because he disagrees or doesn't give you what you want, you have a right to express your feelings and values and preferences and goals, but not to get into a contempt of humiliating a fellow human being, especially the person that you claim to love. So what's the solution to the risk of ridiculing or humiliating your partner? You recognize when a situation or topic of discussion is important to you and it raises your anxiety or your fear. So resist the urge to fight in the gutter by ridiculing or insulting. Instead, state your case for what you're asking of your partner, and by giving an explanation and a rationale of why something is important to you. And that can be in the context of your own life perspective, your life experiences, that of your culture that you were raised in, either your nationality or your religion or other aspects of culture, or just your value system of what you find important. So avoid lashing out if you're frustrated, and use an assertive statement of the benefits for you both if you do things a certain way. Number 14, the last one, and this is the big one, is abuse. This is just the ultimate. Abusing your partner verbally, emotionally, financially, socially, and certainly physically is the wrong thing to do. I witnessed this at a gay section of a beach in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. I was out on a pretty Sunday with hundreds and hundreds of gay men in this one stretch of beach, and an incident of domestic violence occurred. Two guys in a relationship, one guy hit the other one and broke the skin, and the back of his head was bleeding. And somebody tried to confront him and say, "Will you knock that off?" And he's like, "It's nothing." It's like, nothing? The guy's bleeding. And it was kind of shocking for the crowd around them to see. Sometimes you have physical abuse like that and it's not even hidden. And can you imagine what people do behind closed doors if they're willing to do that in public? That's just, from a human rights perspective, that's just a wrong thing to do to somebody. And it's certainly illegal in most places, in addition to being unethical. Normal people don't abuse others, period. So what's the solution if you find yourself in that? If you know that you do that, try to avoid just plain shaming yourself. Don't get into a shame of, I acted out in that way, I'm a piece of shit. That actually, ironically enough, doesn't help. It doesn't help as much as you think it would, or even at all. Instead, you just recognize that there's a need for expert help. People who have abused others can learn not to do that. such as through local batterers group therapy or other programs that are designed to help people with the behavioral art and science of affect regulation and impulse control and anger management and choosing alternative behaviors. So if you were abused growing up yourself, could be from a dad, could be from a mom, part of your brain has learned to mimic that behavior in ways that you don't even realize. You've learned it unconsciously, and you've remembered it even unconsciously, and it can come out as an impulse. It was a behavioral and visual and auditory and kinetic teaching, and not even necessarily a verbal teaching. And those influences can be powerful. And stress, depression, exhaustion, disinhibition from substances, emotional desperation, trauma, abandonment, fears, anxieties, these can all fuel getting into abusive behaviors toward others. And it's not exactly your fault. It's your responsibility, but it's not your victim's fault either. You can take responsibility for the important need to change behavior for all kinds of legal and ethical and human rights reasons without going into self-shame, which often makes it worse. Don't rely on yourself to recognize what is and is not abusive behavior. That's usually for your victim to decide. Within reason. There can be unreasonable situations where manipulating or splitting or gaslighting behavior is present, particularly if you have a partner with the narcissistic or the borderline or the antisocial personality disorders. Those are clinical disorders that complicate the situation. But if you are on the receiving end of abusive behavior, or if you know that you're the perpetrator of abusive behavior, don't try and address this alone. Get professional help from a qualified therapist, and probably both individual and group treatment, and not necessarily couples therapy. When we talk about abuse and domestic violence, most therapists will say, not all, but most, that couples therapy is not the best idea because it can lead to intensifying abuse at home after you've had couples therapy in the office. That's something that might be a part of the treatment in certain models, and you'll have different professional opinions on that, but your own individual therapy and group therapy is often particularly good at moving past domestically violent or abusive situations. So let's conclude. Just being aware of the popular unhealthy traits that therapists like Armine and I see in practice can be helpful to avoid them. Just if you become mindful and aware of the traits that unhealthy relationships have, you can kind of learn to do the opposite, to do the solutions. So, and it's helpful, of course, to be aware of the healthy traits and to try to incorporate those and say, let's model our relationship around the healthiest relationships that we've ever seen. In my own family, I've seen relationships I think are unhealthy. I wouldn't want to be in some of the relationships I've seen in my family. And then other relationships in my family modeled beautiful behavior. They were romantic, they were fair, they were fun, they were enduring, they were happy. Yeah, I want some of that. So healthy relationships are a combination of avoiding the unhealthy factors while cultivating the healthy ones. That's why we have two lists today. And by being aware of the unhealthy factors to avoid and the healthy factors to focus on and cultivate, that's how we guide our lives for a maximum functioning of the relationship, so that it's enduring, it lasts a long time, and it doesn't end in some fiery breakup, but also that it's happy. It doesn't just endure and kind of stagger on, but it endures with a high quality of life as well. So, if you need help or support for making the most of your relationship, or even knowing yourself before you even enter a new relationship, please consider therapy or coaching. My colleagues and I at gaytherapyla.com are here to help you on your way to navigating your way through these traits, through the minefield of modern gay men's dating. So feel free to email me, Ken at gaytherapyla.com. Or you can call or text my cell in the U.S. I think it's 01 if you're not in the U.S. Is the country code, and then the area code 310-339-5778. That's 310-339-5778 for more information, or even to make an appointment for your own customized support. And please visit gaytherapyla.com/blog and search on blog articles that might also interest you and the previous podcast episodes. If you have ideas for podcast episodes, please let me know, or feedback or questions. I welcome that. We also welcome ratings. We want to spread the word about the Gay Therapy LA podcast and the services available. So please feel free to share with friends who might benefit from this kind of material. So, thanks, and I'll see you next time.